Chapter 14. Finding the Foal. Zed watched the carriage, with Uncle Oswald at the reins, turn down the road to Felselheim, and felt a pang of pity for Annika, facing her first lunch with her new aunt. Then he saddled Rocco and rode off down the lane that skirted the lake to the little village of Marienbau. He was still on Spittal land. The houses belonged to the von Tannenbergs, and the church at the edge of the green had housed the graves of the family for generations past. Zed tied Rocco to the hitching post and made his way between the tombstones to a large sarcophagus, standing on its own. The master had wanted a simple grave, but his daughters had insisted on this edifice of stone. Here lies Johannes August Heinrich von Tannenberg, Freiherr of Spittal, born 1844, died 1906. God rest his soul. Zed took off his cap and bowed his head. Then he sat down on the turf, out of sight of the village street, with his legs drawn up and his back against the cold stone. His mother's people, the Romanes, liked to play music and dance on the graves of the people they had loved, but he could not dance on this great stone box. "Oh, why did you have to die?" he said to the master. He had heard that Eltraut's long-lost daughter was coming to live at Spittal, and thought nothing of it. The rumours were of a timid kitchen child who would be overawed by the grandeur of her new life. In any case, it had nothing to do with him. His future lay elsewhere. But Annika was a person. She was real, and she was nice. And she would lose the battle. They would turn her into someone who thought she had a God-given right to rule others. In a few weeks or months, the friendly, helpful girl would become a stuck-up little madam. She would speak like Herman and stamp her feet if she didn't get her way. "And I can't help her," said Zed to the old man, who lay beneath the stone. "You know I can't." He sat there, thinking, till Rocco whinnied, and it was time to go. When Herman was born, his mother was not living at Spittal. She had married a year earlier and gone to live on her husband's estate, Borvold, which was some 50 kilometres away. Mathilde too had married, and their father, the Freiherr von Tannenberg, whom everybody called the master, ran Spittal on his own, which suited him well. He was a huge man, with broad shoulders, big hands, greying hair, and very blue eyes. One of those men who never needed to raise their voice to be obeyed. Under his rule, the farm prospered. The tenants were well cared for. He was on good terms with his neighbours, as they were with him. When his grandson Herman was born, the master was pleased and proud. He rode over to Borvold and was shown the baby. Herman was handsome and healthy, a worthy heir for the von Tannenbergs. And as he grew into a toddler and then a sturdy little boy, the master started to look out for a horse that the boy could grow up with, and train and be trained by. So he travelled by train to a famous stud farm on the edge of the Hungarian plain. A place of wind and grass, and men who seemed to be born and die in the saddle, like the Mongols of old. The plain, the Puszta as it was called, goes rolling on eastwards towards the steppes of Russia. Gypsies travel there unhindered, and so do horse herders and aristocrats riding with their servants to feasts or hunting parties. And of course, there are the peasants who herd their geese and tend their flocks and do the real work of the land. The master knew the stud, which was called Zverno. It was linked with Lipizza, near Trieste, where the white stallions were bred for Vienna, and had provided some of the best riding horses in Europe. And there he consulted a man he knew, Tibor Malakoff, who had come west from Russia, buying and selling horses, and had ended up as manager of the stud. Tibor liked the Freiherr, master of Spittal. He knew him to be a man of honour, but he liked the idea of finding a horse for his grandson. He took him round the paddocks where the colts frisked and skittered, and through the big stone barns where the mares waited for their foals. There were greys bought from Lipiza that had been crossed with Arab and Berber mares, smaller and sturdy horses from Mongolia, Irish hunters. Tibor led the Freiherr on slowly, pointing out the special qualities of this animal or that, and the Freiherr asked questions. Nothing was said about any particular horse. Freiherr had the feeling that they were waiting for something, and he was right. Presently, down the straight white road which led from the village, a small figure appeared, looking even smaller under the weight of the school satchel on his back. "My son, Zed," said the manager, and to the child, "Are you sure about what you told me yesterday?" "I am sure," said the boy, doffing his cap and shaking hands with the Freiherr. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old, and looked less. He was very dark, and burnt darker still by the sun, so his strange light-flecked eyes were very noticeable. "Then get changed quickly, and take Herr von Tannenberg to see him." And the boy ran off. "His mother was a gypsy, and you can say what you like, they're not like us. The boy has, I don't know what it is, an instinct. He had it almost as soon as he could walk. But I don't want you to be influenced. If you disagree—" He looked at the huge man standing relaxed beside the paddock gate and broke off. To influence this old aristocrat would be difficult. The boy came back without his satchel, dressed in a pair of breeches and an old jersey. Without his cap, he seemed even smaller. "You will find me in my office," said the man. "I've got a rather good bottle of Tokay." Though he was so small, the child was not shy. He took the master's hands and led him with absolute assurance to the part of the farm the old man had not seen before, and into a stone barn with clean whitewashed walls and high windows through which the sun shone to the deep yellow straw. About 20 mares were tethered in a line along the walls, resting or suckling their foals. The foals wandered freely among them. The more curious ones came up to the Freiherr and the boy, exploring and nuzzling their clothes. "Watch," said the boy. They stood still in the middle of the barn for what seemed to be a long time. There were foals of all colours, dappled greys, roans, bays, some newborn, others already confident on their long legs. After a while, the boy turned his head to look at the master. "Do you see?" he said. "There are several which—" "No," said the little boy. The assurance in his voice was almost comical. "There is only one." The master went on watching. He was beginning to see what the boy saw, but he was not yet sure. Zed waited till the foal came closer. Then, "That one." The foal was tawny, big lustrous eyes, curious and eager. There were other foals almost as curious, as eager, and trembling with life. Almost, but not quite. "He's the best," said the child. And then, "If your grandson is nice, his name is Rocco." Rocco was not ready to leave his mother, nor to make the long journey by train to Spittal. The master left a deposit, drank a glass of Tokay, and waited. In the event, it was nearly 6 months before the colt could be sent to Spittal. The master went to the station. The guard opened the door of the van. The groom led the horse down the ramp. In a dark corner, a pile of straw moved, and a small head appeared. "I came too," said Zed. "Where is your father?" The child turned his face away. "He died." The groom explained. "He tried to stop a fight. There were knives." He shrugged. "They were so common, these pointless drunken fights. There was a woman at the stud farm who was happy to adopt the boy, but he wanted to come to you." The master nodded. He examined the colt and shook hands with Zed. They went home. The first 2 years Zed spent at Spittal were happy ones. He lived with Bertha in a flat above the stables in the courtyard. He worked with the horses. He made himself useful on the farm and went to the village school. But often in the evening, the master took him into his room and showed him his books and his maps, or told him stories between puffs on his long-stemmed pipe. Bertha looked after the boy as she had looked after the master, but really he needed very little care. And the colt grew and became tame and was handled, ready for Herman. Then everything changed. Eltraut's husband, Franz von Unterfall, sold his estate, and she brought him and her son back home to live at Spittal. When Herman came, Zed, who was 2 years older, thought it was his job to help and protect him. But Herman soon made it clear that he didn't want a stable boy for a friend. A year after Eltraut's return, the Freiherr had a stroke. He lived for 2 more months, unable to speak, helpless. Bertha and Zed nursed their master, willing him to recover, but he got steadily weaker. They were both at his bedside when he died. After the farm, Bertha and Zed were sent to the hut in the farmyard and allowed to work in the big house, but not to sleep in it. A few weeks later, Eltraut's husband sailed for America. From then on, she dropped her married name and ran the estate on her own.